Please welcome Chris Jones.
I had a deal with Sean that he was to provide me with a 48-minute introduction. We were going to do a 2-minute Q&A, so he kind of let me down there. Thanks for having me. You'll note that I am the one writer here who didn't bring my editor. As Amy said, I'm like Clint Eastwood at the Oscars talking to a chair. I asked my editor, who's a man named Peter, whether he would come, and Peter said, let me think about, oh no, I hate those fucking things. So I apologize that he's not here. He hates these things. I really like them. I like them for a couple of reasons. I like them because it's very rare that you can sit in a room where you know that every single person in it has disappointed their family. Makes me feel less alone. Eric, the GQ editor, was talking about his alternate career in medicine as a neuroscientist. And I was like, what the hell? And that seems pretty good. I don't know. The other reason I like being at these things is where else can I make $5,000 for sitting on a chair for 30 minutes talking to students? My first and only lesson to you, in negotiations, never name the number. Never be the first number. I had a recent contract negotiation where, for a small contract at ESPN, and my boss was like, so how much money do you want? And I said a number, and he goes, okay. And I said, oh shit, I probably should ask for more. And he says, yeah. Never name the number. I also, sort of funnily enough, received some news this weekend that, good news, that means I don't have to give a shit about anything anymore. And so this conference, I'm warning you all now, I'm going to be profane, and if you want to turn off the feed to the internet, you're more than welcome to do that. I told Paige Williams last night that my goal was to tell 2 stories involving me pooping beds, and she kind of went, ah, that's funny, and I was like, no, I'm really going to tell 2 stories about me shitting bed. But I'll save those for later. I'm going to begin by a very recent email exchange that I had with an editor who should probably remain anonymous, but it's Tim Marchman from Deadspin, who emailed me out of the blue recently, and I'm going to, give me one moment. And by the way, if my agent calls during this conversation, I'm going to answer my phone. All right, so this comes from Tim. We may have an anti-mutual appreciation society going here, but I think one other thing we have in common is an affection and admiration for W.C. Hines. True thing, one of my first published pieces involved calling him up to talk about his war experiences for an anthology of his war reporting. I appreciated it at the time and appreciate it more now. As you probably know, the Library of America publishes an anthology of his best work Tuesday, and we'll be having a bit of a Hines week to celebrate. We'll be running his Pete Reiser piece and rerunning an excerpt from The Professional. And John Schulian has written a really wonderful tribute to the man and his work. It's short notice. I probably should have asked a while ago. But if you have anything to say on Hines, or a particular piece of his, or his installation into the American canon, I'd love to run it. Tim. Now that seems like a very nice email to get out of the blue. One of the nice things about this business is it's painfully difficult to crack into sometimes. But once you're in, you're in. Money falls from the sky. What you don't know in this background is that Deadspin and I have had a running battle for many years. They've said terrible things about me and my friends. And Tim Marchman, my last email from Tim Marchman, and this is no joke, this is what he wrote me, unsolicited. I think you're a gifted stylist. Oh, that's nice. A diligent reporter. Oh, huh. And bring terrible output. The fuck? Kind of like a gifted, hardworking, and terrible actor, like Al Pacino. Then he emails me to ask me to do work for him. I'm confused. I actually go for a walk because I go, well, how am I supposed to respond to this? I don't want to do this. I don't like him. I don't want to work for him. Is it somehow not magnanimous if I say no? I really love Bill Hines. Like, should I praise Bill Hines and take this opportunity? No, that'll make us feel dirty. I don't want to do this. So, oh, my agent's calling. It went to voicemail. Damn it. You have my full attention. So I wrote back, I'm glad you're celebrating Mr. Hines, but dude, even this winter hasn't frozen hell over. I assume that's the end of it. 2 minutes later, Tim emails me back. Whatever, man. I don't respect you, and you don't respect me. That aside, my idea here was having you write something about Bill Hines for us might draw some attention to a book that deserves to have some attention drawn to it. If you're in it on some other plan that will draw more attention to the book, I think that's great. If not, get over yourself and either write something for us or for somewhere else that will get people who like good writing paying attention to a good book. I've never been threatened into writing a piece. So again, I was perplexed, and I wrote back, gee, when you put it that way, I'll get right on it. What sort of length do you want? And then I wrote, I'm speaking at a conference next week about editors and writers. I'm going to read this exchange out loud. It has to be one of the most batshit emails I've ever received. Holy shit, you're like bad cop, good cop from the Lego movie. Rest assured, Tim, I'll shout praise for Bill's book from many rooftops, just not from yours. I hope you can still not respect me for that. And to Tim's credit, he wrote back, have fun at the conference, I guess. I'm shouting from the rooftop. This is Bill Hines' new anthology. If you want to know anything about good writing and good editing, it is contained in this book. Sincerely, I believe that every writer, you need to find a saint. You need to find like a patron, a writer that you love. And then the question you have to ask yourself is why? I think it's really easy for all of us to say, I love that movie, or I love that song, or I love that book. And we don't go to the next step, which is, why do we love that book? Why do we love that song? What is it about it that hits us? And if you want to emulate that kind of writing, if you find someone that you really love, you've got to figure out the why. Is it structure? Is it the language? Is it the pacing? Is it the reporting? Is it the rhythm? And then how can you get that stuff in yourself? For me, Bill Hines was like one of my patrons. A lot of people would find him, he writes very, very plainly. And a lot of people would find him, boring is the wrong word, but dull and unadventurous. And for me, he's this perfect example of like crystalline, beautiful, rhythmic language. And that's why I love him. So to make Tim feel better about this situation, I'm shouting Bill Hines' anthology from this rooftop. I thought what I would do is talk a little bit about my weird journey and pretend that these stories are like parables in some way, and that there's actually a point to me just blabbering on about myself, and that there are lessons in them. I hope there are. One advantage that all of you have over me is that you apparently have some idea of what you want to do when you grow up. Whenever I was asked that question, I always asked if not growing up was an option. It never was. And I was one of those lost kids. I took several different things in school and wasn't a very good student. But I always wrote. And one of the things you sort of realize later in life as you look back on your career, there will be people who you meet along the way who make massive differences to your career, and you might not even realize it at the time, like how big a difference they're making, and they might not realize how big a difference they are making, and you look back and you go, well, that's the person. And these things are always hard because you want to provide practical advice about getting a career and getting your job and things like that, and one of the stupid pieces of advice I have is to be there when someone important just says, well, I don't know, frig her, and just be the one who's standing there and go, and I don't know how you teach, how you teach that or how you make that happen. It's one of those things like you just have to be present. And so many times in my career, I've been the person who just happened to be standing there when someone just gave up and went, that guy. And it's made all the difference. And so I want this to happen for you, but I don't know how to say, make this happen. You just kind of have to be stupid in some ways, and I'll illustrate this. So my first job in journalism, as Sean definitely introduced, I was a graduate student in urban planning, hated urban planning. I was in urban planning because I liked Lego. And urban planning is not Lego. It's incredibly bureaucratic and boring, and I just hated it so much. I did learn how to color very well, and I can draw every tree you can imagine from an overhead perspective. But other than that, my skills were limited there. And luckily, I lived in this weird, I'm Canadian, and we do things strangely in Canada. And our universities are these little colleges. I think you guys have fraternities and sororities. We have these colleges, they're called. And mine was this like very arcane place where you wore black gowns, and it was like Harry Potter. You did snuff after dinner. It was a really strange and wonderful place. And the headmaster of Massey College was a former journalist who used to see me writing away, and he knew I wasn't writing for school because I colored for school. And he would say, you know, what are you writing? And I showed it to him. And John, for no good reason, and he's the first in a series of people who, for no good reason, set me up with an interview with a guy named Ken White, who was then the editor of a magazine called Saturday Night. And unbeknownst to me, was going to become the editor of a brand new newspaper called the National Post. And John set me up with an interview with Ken, which became the world's worst job interview because I didn't know the newspaper was coming. So he kept talking about this newspaper, and I kept correcting him, saying, you mean the magazine? And he was going, no, the newspaper. And I was going, well, I don't want to tell you your business, but this is a magazine. And I remember very distinctly leaving that sort of 20-minute interview. Oh, I mean, the other bad part of that interview is I had no writing to show him. I literally gave him my master's thesis, which was on how to design hockey arenas. I had like a 20-minute conversation with him, and very confusing. I left. I remember very distinctly calling my parents from a payphone because that's how old I am. I called from a payphone, and I said, well, that's not going to happen. I'm going to be an urban planner. And then a little while later, I got a call from Ken's assistant saying, okay, what we're going to do with idiots like you is the paper's not starting up till the fall. This is like April. We're going to stash a bunch of you at a bureau in Toronto, and you're going to go to work. And if you're good, you get a job. And if you're not good, you're gone. Okay. And we were called Ken's kids, derogatorily by the other people, the professionals in this bureau, who suddenly got stashed with all these children who needed very careful minding. And they're just like, what the hell's going on? And all of a sudden, people like me are going. And my very first day, and remember, I have no experience, no journalism education, was to write a story about like regulation in the insurance industry. I remember going, what the? And I wrote this piece that got put into some papers. It was like this long, and I was really proud of it. And my mom, who is an English teacher, circled the 8 grammatical and spelling errors that were in it in red pen. And I was like, wow, this sucks. But that summer, I just worked, and it was a trial by fire. And I can recommend this to you. It was a very good experience for me. I learned a ton. It was awful a lot of the times, but I learned a lot. And at the end, as the paper was starting to come together, people's phones would start to ring, and they would get plucked up to the paper. And we're all sitting there looking at each other as, you know, the ones who are sort of sitting there left behind, and one more would go, and you'd be like, oh, shit. And then my phone started ringing, and I was getting a call from the guy who would be the news editor at the Post, a guy named Martin, very scary English man who was so heavily muscled, his back looked like a bat. Like he was like, and then another English guy, a guy named Graham Parley, who was the sports editor. And they were both calling me. So in my head, this means they are fighting over my services. And it was only many years later, and Graham said this to me, and I think the title for this presentation is supposed to be Lies My Editor Told Me. Graham said, oh, yeah, we're just trying to decide where you should go best, you know, blah, blah, blah. They were fighting over who had to take me. I found out later, and Ken was going, one of you has to take him, and Graham's going, I don't want him, and Martin's saying, I don't want him, and then finally Graham took me because I wouldn't count against his hiring quota. Graham was like, I will take him as long as he comes for free. Like he doesn't count. And Ken's like, fine, he doesn't count. And I'm oblivious to all of this. I look back on it and I'm like, oh my God. Like, if I'd known that, I just would have walked away and disappeared. And all these weird things in your life that just kind of. I was making $15,000 a year to write for a national newspaper. And I had no business being there. And again, there's no advice here. Be really dumb and say I have a terrible job interview, and for whatever reason have this guy go, yeah, that guy, you know, it makes no sense. Also accept $15,000 as your starting wage living in Toronto, which means you're living like above a Lebanese restaurant with 3 other dudes. All my clothes smell like tabbouleh. But Graham became the first of my editor champions. And Tim Marchman, in that email exchange, I think, illustrates the 2 stereotypes of the editor. The loving, caring, concerned person who wants you to do good work and work that is good for other people. And then the batshit, crazy, abusive, temperamental nutbar, who we all suspect is our editor deep inside. And Graham was crazy in a lot of ways. I mean, I can remember him throwing things and screaming and phones flying around the room. But he taught me so much about the business. And I remember one conversation, again, talking about sort of trying to find practical advice and all of this stuff. I wrote a boxing story that I was very proud of and that Graham had complimented me on. And it showed up in the paper the next day, and the copy editor had copy edited a mistake into it. It copy edited a sentence so that it was no longer a sentence. And for someone like me, I am a very anal person. You can tell by the way I'm dressed. And I was really mad. And I called Graham from this train. I was taking the train back from Montreal where this fight was to Toronto, and I called him and I said, you know, Graham, I gotta say, I'm like super pissed off about this thing. Like, I don't care, if I make a mistake and it doesn't get caught, that's on me, but I don't think editors should be adding mistakes to stories. There's sort of silence, and then I hear this like, you ungrateful little bitch. And I'm on this train, I'm like, oh shit. And he goes, do you know how lucky you are? You're writing 2,000-word sports stories for a national newspaper, and you don't even belong here. Like, you shouldn't be here, and you're calling me to complain about a typo that someone, you know, working at midnight, laying out one of your 2,000-word masterpieces has done for you. They laid it out carefully, pictures, your byline is huge, and you're calling me to complain? And I'm going, well, it's just that, you know, I worked hard on it, and I want these things to be perfect, and Graham goes, is it about the money? And it wasn't. But I'm like, yeah, it's about the money. And when I got to Toronto, I was suddenly making $60,000. I went from 15 to 60 in a train ride. And I was like, that's a magical, so it's about the money. I think all of us think that we're making art, or that, you know, we talk about muses and poetry. This business is a business. And very rationally, businesses will try to get you to write for as cheaply as they can. And if you agree to it, they have done nothing wrong. They're not forcing you to do it. And if the next person will do it for free, they're going to do it for free, and you're not going to get to do it because you're asking for money. And it's a very complicated thing. But one of the things I want you to leave from here is know that editors want you to work for nothing, not because they're evil, because that makes perfect sense. Don't work for nothing. Your words have value. You're in school. You're accruing massive amounts of student debt that you have to pay back, presumably. Your words are worth something. And that ride on that train was one of those moments where I was like, yeah, I'm good enough now that I'm worth something. But my stupidity remained. And I always wanted to work for magazines. And so while at the paper, I walked into Esquire. I was in New York covering a Blue Jays and Mets baseball series. And I walked into Esquire. And the story has gotten around a lot, so I won't tell the whole story, but I did bring donuts. A janitor pointed me in the right direction. That janitor has no idea the impact he's had on my life. I swear to God, because I was walking out of Esquire. I went to see the editor-in-chief and the security guard at the bottom, because the editor-in-chief would want to meet this 26-year-old baseball writer from Canada. I just didn't know how you got on the radar. And in my head, I was like, you got on the radar by showing up. And the security guard is like, well, there's no way in hell you're getting in. And the janitor stopped me on my way out. He'd overheard the conversation. He's like, you want to talk to this guy, Andy? Love sports, deputy editor. I was like, holy shit, okay. So I call Andy, and Andy became my next champion. And Andy, for no good reason, let me come upstairs for 45 minutes, talk to him. I gave him my stuff. Again, because I'm an idiot, I don't recommend this. I made him read my stuff as I was sitting there. He was like, I'll read it later. I was like, no, can you please read it now? And it's because I wanted to know if it was even possible. I don't believe in false hope. And I wanted him to say, you don't have it, or you do have it. I didn't want to be that person on American Idol who thinks they can sing. I wanted just some kind of answer. And he read one of my pieces. He said, we wouldn't have as many one-sentence paragraphs, but it's pretty good. All I need is to know. I left the paper, quit the paper, gave my parents heart attacks. Andy calls out of nowhere. 6 months later, I was living in a car in Flagstaff, Arizona, which if you're going to be homeless is a beautiful place to be homeless. Andy said that 10 people, their sports columnist was leaving, 10 people were going to get to write a story, best story got the job. Holy shit. It's the job I want more than anything. And I'm also broke. So you can imagine that kind of, I was like, I gotta nail this. 10 people, okay, that's not bad. That's 1 in 10. Like, those are pretty good odds. I mean, they're not great odds, but they're pretty good. I go off and I write my story, and Andy runs me through the ringer on it, because newspaper writing and magazine writing are two extraordinarily different things. Sometimes I get asked, is there a stigma if you were a newspaper writer? And I don't think there is. I think in some ways newspaper writers have an advantage when you go to the world of magazines, because you sometimes seem like a wizard because you can write a story in a couple of days that will take some other guy 9 months. And I remember with that story, I turned it in like 2 days, and Andy was like, no, you've got like 6 weeks. And I'm like, 6 weeks? Like, what the hell am I going to do for 6 weeks? I was like, I guess I'll just sit this in my fridge, and 6 weeks from now I'll send it. Like, I don't know what the... It's a very different job. And Andy was awesome at sort of coaching me through things. At that time, again, because I'm old, there were these machines called fax machines. They magically sent paper through the air. I guess technically it wasn't paper going through, I don't know. And we would get our galleys, these sort of typewritten rows of these, once it was laid out in type, and they would come out of your machine. And I remember that first story, I was pretty proud of it. It was the best thing I'd written, because I'd spent 6 weeks on it instead of 2 days. And it's slowly coming out of my machine, and I don't know what you call it, those big brackets that are like this. Big, so it's coming out, and I see the top of one of these brackets. This is shit. And then the rest of it comes out, and it looked like what Kelly had done to Ben's story. It was like, because editors are sadists, and they have no idea, the work you put into it. No, I'm just kidding. But Andy was the one who taught me the value of a good editor. Because at the paper, I mean, one of the Ben's story accepted, that's sort of a remarkable situation. Most of the stuff that you do at a paper, I mean, it doesn't get edited. It's slammed in, and it's midnight, and if mistakes are in there, they're your mistakes, and I found it terrifying. But Andy taught me that magazine, once you get here, you're getting edited, and you got to take criticism well. And online, my online personality or whatever, I'm very thin-skinned, mostly because I can't stand idiots talking shit when they don't know what they're talking about. But I can take criticism from someone who knows, and Andy knew. Then a terrible thing happened. I was in Colorado Springs working on a bull riding story, and I didn't have I got the job. Oh, I got the job. I got the job. And years later, found out there wasn't 10 people, there was just me. And Andy wanted to scare the shit out of me. Totally worked. I mean, I was terrified. I mean, I gotta be honest, like it was a genius, stroke of genius, and also cruel and inhumane. And another lie, editors lie. Evan Ratliff, who's here somewhere, he's in the back. We were doing a podcast together in Romania, of all places. It's a very glamorous life, writing. You go to Romania and do podcasts. And he said something like, you realize you've been lied to so many times by editors. And I kind of went, holy shit. Like, I hadn't realized it until that moment. There's this moment on this podcast where I'm going, oh my God, you're totally right. But I guess they lied with purpose. But then I'm in Colorado Springs, and the phone rings, and it's David Granger, who's the big boss at Esquire, who I never talked to. I'm like, oh shit, I'm getting fired. And at that point, I had no contract. I was story to story. Granger calls up and he says, hey, do you want a contract? I was like, I sure do, buddy. And like an idiot, I named the number. Okay. I was like, and 2 seconds later, Andy calls. And Andy says, I'm leaving. And I'm like, you're leaving? And he's like, yeah, I'm going to go to GQ. And I was like, oh, well, fiddle-dee-dee. 2 minutes ago, I agreed to a contract at Esquire. And what had been going on was like one of those Jerry Maguire agent moments where they're like both calling everybody and like, you're going to come with me, you're going to come with me. And one of the things I didn't realize about magazines is that you are, an editor will build a stable of writers like horses, and you only work for that editor. Like Peter's my boss, and I only work for Peter, and at that point, Andy was my boss, and I only work for Andy. And if another editor approaches you with a story, this is like a sin within the office, there will be blood. And you go with the editor. You don't work for Esquire, you work for Andy. And now Andy's going to GQ. I'm like, oh, crap. I was like, so am I going to GQ? And he goes, well, listen, you know, I was talking to Jim Nelson, the editor, and he doesn't, you know, and he kind of trails off. And I go, he's like, he doesn't want you. I was like, who's going? And he's like, everybody else. And that's a moment. Because, you know, there's one thing to be picked last. There's one thing to be last and then not picked. We're better off just without you on the team, was what I was informed. And Jim had no reason to hire me. I mean, I need to say this. Jim had no reason to hire me. I'd written like 5 stories, and I was just some idiot. Like, he had no reason to hire me. But that has created, I mean, Esquire and GQ are natural rivals anyway. But that did create a lifelong animosity where I wanted to kick the shit out of GQ so bad. And now that I've met Jeff and Eric and Amy, I feel really bad about this. I won't go into detail, but just ask the hotel to change your pillows. All the pillows. But that's the business. And then the greatest thing that ever happened to me. Pure fluke. Andy leaves. I get moved to Peter Griffin. He's heard all the jokes. I get moved to Peter Griffin as like a stopgap until they hire the editor who is going to replace Andy. And I'm going to go back to that editor. I start working with Peter. And Peter is, it's a horrible thing to know, but I know this to be true. Peter is the best working relationship I've had and will ever have. And I know it's not going to last forever. But I understand what it is. And I can't emphasize enough to you how important that editor is for your career. Among all my idiotic things that I've done, the best, smartest thing I did was after a couple of stories with Peter, I called Granger, and I said, can I stay with Peter? Whoever you hire, can I just stay with Peter? And Granger talked to Peter, and Peter said yes. Everything changes. And that's one of those zigzag life moments. If you find that person, and again, I can't give you the advice on how to find that person, but if you find that person, you stumble into life, and you find, if they're a person at the school you really like as an editor, if there's someone you know who's out there who edits great stuff, if you love a certain writer, find out who their editor is. Because their editor is half of that shit. And find out who that person is and latch on them. And if they, for whatever stupid reason, take you under their wing, never, ever, ever let go of them. Like, they are everything to you. And Peter, through every part of the process, idea, reporting, writing, and I'll say briefly each step here, idea, reporting, writing, editing, he's magic. And with the ideas, he's like a witch. Like, I will pitch 20 ideas. They pay me. I have a salary. They're paying me. I should write for them. I will pitch 20 ideas for everyone that Peter says yes to. And why he says yes to certain things, I have no idea. He said yes to Carrot Top. Now let me tell you, I pitched Carrot Top. I shouldn't share that. Fuck it. I pitched Carrot Top. I pitched Carrot Top because there's a writer on Twitter I can't stand. Nameless Stephen Roderick. Bad man, two-faced. Who said my dream profile is Carrot Top on Twitter. I'm fucking having that. I told Peter that after he said yes, and after I did the story, and he was like, that seems beneath you, doesn't it? And I was like, no, that's me. That's dead level me. But the idea process, he winnows it down. Sometimes he'll say yes so quickly. You know, the things that carried him, which is one of the stories Sean mentioned about, it's the best story I'll ever do, and that's another depressing thing to know, like the story that you wrote 5 years, you'll never top it, and I recognize that I won't. But I pitched that as an aside in an in-person meeting, and Peter says, yep. And that story, you know, got some attention because it was written backwards. It was like the chronology was reversed. I say to Peter, I think maybe we should do a story about a body coming back from Iraq. Peter looks at Granger and goes, yep. And then he says, maybe you should write it backwards. And I kind of go, why the hell would I do that? It's because Peter's a witch, and he just sees things that I can't see. And that was so quick, that pitch was so quick, that I actually wrote him the next day when I got home, and I said, I just want to be clear that we've made an agreement that I'm to go do this story, because I really want to sort of disappear into this story. It's really important, and I want to go. And Peter sent me one of the great emails you'll ever get from an editor, and it was like, go, we'll see you when you get back, make it great. And 8 months, I was gone, and he never complained. Reporting, here's a little tip, practical advice for you writers. When you're reporting, call up your editor when you get something really good. Don't give them the whole story. Little nugget. You wouldn't believe this moment. In their heads, they're already killing the other stories in the magazine to make more room for yours. Jeff, pay attention. You call up and you give them little nuggets. You're excited. You never call up and complain. The story's not going so well. Editor's going, oh, I'm killing that one. It's only good. It's only good. During the writing process, I'm pretty much by myself. Peter doesn't want to see chunks. He wants to see the whole story. It's a bit nerve-wracking when you're writing a big story. I will say with things that carried him, so like Jeff and his Russian experience, that story was assigned at 6,000 words. I wrote the first of 13 sections when I knew were 13 sections, and it was 2,000 words, and I did the math, and I went, ooh, this is terrible math. And I called up Peter, and I said, I don't know, am I going to make it a 6? And he goes, 8? And I was like, yeah, maybe 8. Ben holds his dog tooth when he gets nervous. My voice goes like, and then I keep doing it, I call him back up, and I go, Peter, I don't think it'll be 8. And he goes, 10? And I was like, I'll try 10. And then I call him back up again, and I go, and he goes, just fucking write it, just write it. And I wrote 22,000 words and sent that on in. And Peter is such, like, in terms of that story, changed our relationship in some ways, because that's the time we reached like pure faith in each other. Like, where he just was like, write it what it's worth, and he ran 17,000 words about a body in a national magazine. That is crazy. And he edited it carefully, and I mean, he took 5,000 words out of that thing. 17,000 words is still massive, but 5,000 words is a feature. I mean, he cut a feature out of a feature. And then we go to the editing process, and Peter's job for me is, if I had to say in one sort of word, is restraint. Peter's the guy who pulls you back. And he's all those other things that a great editor is. He's a therapist and a cheerleader, and he doesn't bring me burritos ever, but he's very nurturing and kind. He has this lovely way, if I submit a story, and sometimes you just miss. I mean, sometimes you just, and there's this dreadful period when you write for magazines where you submit your story and then you're waiting. And I can't, that is like the worst. I call it the waitening, which makes it sound like more like a horror movie. Because I'm sitting in my house just like, and Peter will call, and at first like, and if he starts making small talk, I'm like, oh shit. A little small talk, and then I go, hey, I think we got to take another run at this. And that's his way of going, burn this. We'll never speak of it again. He's sort of very gentle in that way. Or other times he'll call and go, I love this. And you're like, oh my God, thank God. Nothing makes me happier than pleasing Peter. Like, I can do something great for my wife or my children, and I get like, that's okay. I'm glad they're happy. I make Peter happy. I'm like, yeah. But Peter is that 10% of the pullback. Because if you're trying to write, and this sounds arrogant, if you're trying to write something really good, and I try to write good things, and I often don't, so I'm not saying I do this well. I mean, sometimes I've really fucking nailed it. But he's the one who kind of, if you're swinging, you're going to overswing sometimes. That's just natural. And Peter is awesome at this sort of pullback. And unlike Jeff and GQ, those devils, I don't fight with Peter. Peter and I, in 12 years now, have never argued because I trust Peter totally. And there are moments when I have argued with Peter and he's left a line in, and 5 years later I recognize that it needed to have come out. And sometimes you get your edit back and you'll see a strike through and you'll be like, oh, I like that. Ooh, and you kind of got to sort of breathe deep and go for a while. It's like you're falling on your back and you're kind of going, oh, yeah. But then I take it. And maybe I should fight more. Maybe there is something that's lost in our, maybe there is something to go from that sort of contentious battle. But for me, it's not about that. For me, it's Peter knows what he's doing, the way I know what I'm doing, the way our designer knows what they're doing, and the photographer knows what they're doing. You trust that these people are professionals and they're doing their job. That's how I approach it. And I approach it that way because Peter has proven time and time and time again that he's right. I'm talking about him like I'm in love with him. I realize, which is awkward. And the strange thing about Peter, Peter is like a Yoda-like character at Esquire. People who've worked there 20 years come up to me and go, "Hey, does he have like parents? Like was he born out of a woman, or did he just kind of come out of the earth?" And like nobody knows anything about Peter. I've worked with him. But I trust him totally when it comes to this stuff. And it is a love. It's a weird relationship. It's not like Kelly and Ben saying, "I love you," as they leave the office. It's me sitting in front of you going, "Oh my God, I love Peter so much." He's so important. And I'm really glad that there's this conference going on about editors and writers, because I think one of the strange things about this business, and just understand, all this stuff is rational, like all this stuff is understandable. Young writers often come up to writers to ask about the business and to ask about work and to ask how to get better. It makes perfect sense because that's the person you see. I can't hire you. I can't give you an assignment. In a way, I don't want you to have an assignment because you might be really good and bump me out. Like, it's a bit of I try to be nice. Like, yesterday with Sean, I tried to be nice to Sean. But I said to Sean that if we're ever on a story together, like, I will step on his head. I mean, no joke. I mean, physical violence will visit. Another reason GQ, we had the Zanesville animal incident. Oh my God. Still not over it. I'm sure Chris Heath is a very nice man. Oh my God, do I hate that guy. Not personally, just as an object. So that writer thing is a bit weird that you come up to writers. You go up to editors. You go up to Eric. You go up to in Eric's bio for this thing, it said the magic. I mean, the up and coming editor. That's the guy. He's building his stable. He doesn't have all his horses. He's trying to make a name for himself with Jim in the other big office. He's looking for talent. Talent is actually quite rare. Like people who are really good at this, hard to find. He's the guy. I'm not the guy. He's the guy. He's intimidating because he has a suit on. I'd like to demonstrate that Esquire is clearly the most metal of the men's magazines.
So, I think probably some time for some questions here.
Sure is.
Here we go.
I forgot the bed shitting story. Okay. Hang on. No, I'm telling the story. I promised Paige. I don't want to let Paige down. No. And this actually does, okay, bear with me, this is disgusting, but it has a purpose. You're all my editors right now. This is me calling Peter. I got a reason. So last summer, I've had gut issues like my whole life. So when I was 16, my family went to Hong Kong, big, beautiful glass city. And I drank a bunch of tap water because it was really hot. And that night, we were sleeping in a hotel. And you know, you don't want to sleep with your sister when you're that age. So you sleep with your dad. So I'm sleeping with my dad, and my mom is sleeping with my sister. And I kind of wake up in the night. I'm like, oh, I don't feel awesome. Jesus, I feel terrible, actually. And I filled the bed with a lake of filth. And I'm like, oh my God, what the? Do I wake my dad? No, I don't think I'll wake my dad. So I go into the bathroom and I kind of clean myself. I'm like, what do I do? I was sleeping with my underwear on. I'm like, what? I tuck it behind the toilet tank. I'm like, I can't put it in the garbage. I'm like, oh, stuff over here. Some maid in Hong Kong is still talking about the time she found shitty Canadian underwear behind a toilet tank in a hotel. And my dad woke up the morning, and it was like the scene in The Godfather with the horse's head. And why didn't you wake me? Because he's starfished in the night, right? He's like, why wouldn't you wake me? I was like, I didn't want to disturb you. He's like, I slept in your shed. Something changed that day in our relationship. And ever since then, things have gone sideways with my innards. And last summer I woke up in the night. This always happens at night. It always comes at night. And I woke up in the night and I felt full. I felt like I'd been eating, like a buffet. And I'm like, oh, that's a strange feeling. And, you know, my answer to everything is, oh, may as well try to take a dump. So in the dark, I need to preface this by saying I don't sleep with my wife. The key to a happy marriage, no sleeping together. You sleep together. But then you go to your own bed. Much better. So I stagger to the bathroom in the night, and I mean, I can only describe it as like, you know in The Shining when the elevator doors open? A calamitous, like a tsunami of blood comes out of me. And if you can remember something that you've done thousands of times, like if you can remember a shower you took, something amazing happened in that shower, it was like the most porno shower of your life, or like you fell and carved your eyeball on a tile. Like if you can remember something either amazing happened or something horrible happened, if you can remember a time you went to the bathroom, I will always remember the time I went to the bathroom and I stood up and it was like a crime scene. And I'm just like, oh my God, you know, what's going on? Long story short, I pass out. I go downstairs to talk to my wife and I'm like, I think I need to go to the hospital. I'm just like bleeding internally. And I can feel myself filling back up. My poor wife, oh my God. And I fall over, I pass out. And she drags me down the stairs. I've reconstructed this later. She drags me down the stairs, out to the porch. She calls the ambulance. I'm kind of fading in and out of consciousness. And I see light. I see the light. This orange glow kind of fills my eyes. And I'm a godless person, and I'm going, oh my God, I've been so wrong. And I'm like, holy shit, can I make up for this? I've done so many terrible things. I've only got a minute, and I'm sure I'm dying. I mean, I'm as sure of anything, I'm dying. And the next thing I know, the next day I wake up in the hospital and I haven't died. I've lost a lot of blood. No one knows why. Still, doctor's like, hey, you're 40 minutes. It happens. What the fuck happens? I have a 40-year-old bowel. Sometimes I just kind of go. And I've since realized, I came back home the next day, and that light was the street light that is outside our house. But when you think you're dying, you see all sorts of things that you not really seeing. That moment had like a profound effect on me. Like when you think you're dying, like you have like, I mean, shit, you confront everything. And Peter said after that, he's like, you know, you should do something that you've always wanted to do, but you're scared to do. You should do that. And so I decided I was going to do stand-up comedy, which I always wanted to try and always not done. I found an open mic. 6 minutes, you have 6 minutes. And I show up that night, and I'm trying to act cool with the other comedians. They're all experienced, even though it's open. I'm the only virgin. The MC gets up, he says, hey, we got a new guy. He's never done this before. The crowd boos. oh, wow, okay. And I'm trying to act like cool about it. And meanwhile, I need a towel to like wipe up myself as I'm like, and I go up and the light is so bright when you're up there, you know, you can barely see the stage. And I was so worried I was gonna fall off the stage because I couldn't see my feet. And I gotta tell you, it's one of the best things I've ever done. Like those 6 minutes for me are like magic. It went fine. I didn't kill, I didn't suck, it went fine. But I felt like I was floating. And I think Peter the mystic, has this sense of things where, you know, he didn't show up today because he doesn't like talking about it. He does it. And one thing I do want you guys to do is you're young, you've got lots of time. I think young writers and editors are sometimes panicked that you don't have time to be, I want to be great. Bruce Springsteen wrote Born to Run when he was 24, like I'm running out of time. And it's like, no, you're gonna be cool. You're gonna be cool. You got time. But don't talk about it. Like, do it. That 6 minutes was like a revelation to me. 41, midlife crisis like you wouldn't believe, doing it. And it's all because I had a calamitous shit, and my editor was like, you should do this thing. And I want you to do that thing. I think we have 1 minute and 30 seconds for questions.
So earlier you were saying when you're writing a story to call your editor and only tell them about like the good things that are going with the story. So I have to bring up a specific story that you wrote, the Penelope Cruz Sexiest Woman Alive story, which I know it's going to get you upset. But with that story, obviously you got a lot of heat from Jezebel, which seemed kind of unfounded because it seemed like you didn't really have much to work with anyways. How did that go when you were speaking with your editor and saying like, okay, I did this interview with Penelope Cruz, she gave me nothing. What am I supposed to do?
You know, I've written some good stories. Could ask me about one of them. What's your name? Brooke, what's your last name? Your career's over. I'm messing with you. So that's that story. This is a dirty. The celebrity stuff. No, it's fine. You don't really. I don't. Some people love doing that stuff. I don't love doing that stuff. And at Esquire, you kind of got to take your turn. It's sort of. You just sort of got to do it. And I hadn't taken my turn in a long time. And I got Penelope Cruz. And I was like, okay. And I had done a story on Javier Bardem, her husband, that went really well. And so I thought, okay, this is going to be good. I get to go to Spain, I hang out with Penelope Cruz, and life's not bad. She was a nightmare. The worst interview I've ever had. And I've interviewed politicians, I've interviewed generals, military people. No one kept a secret like Penelope Cruz. She wouldn't tell me anything, even completely innocuous things. Oh, I'm going to go film a movie. Oh, what movie? I just finished this movie. Oh, what's that about? And I did call Peter after that, because I was like, Peter, I got to tell you, I got nothing. I mean, nothing. And Peter's like, well, you make something out of stuff. I got nothing. So I wrote about bullfighting. And much like this talk, I was like, it'll just be a story, but maybe people can pretend it's a parable or a metaphor or a simile. They can imagine that I'm profound when I'm just an idiot. It'll be great. And my first draft did not mention Penelope Cruz until the very last sentence, where I was like, by the way, Penelope Cruz, kind of dick. And I sent it in, and Peter was like, wow, I really like this. I don't know that we can do it. You know, we have all the pictures of Penelope Cruz, and it's a bit weird. Needs a bit more Penelope. So I have a scene of Penelope eating meat. It's a great piece of meat. And I put that, and then that was it. And we put it out, and I mean, I know Peter and I were talking, I was like, Jezebel's gonna kill me on this. I mean, Jezebel will kill me on anything, but I'm like, Jezebel's gonna kill me on this. And I have reached the stage, this is post my bleed out. I don't give a shit anymore. And I really don't. And it's so free. For years, I spent like the first 20 years of my career going, oh, you don't care, like you make lots of money and life is good and you have a wife and kids who love you and everything's good. And you convince yourself that it doesn't matter. But it still mattered, it still bugged me. But then I had this moment where I was like, I don't give a shit what Jezebel thinks. I don't. I don't give a shit I care what Peter thinks. I care what my wife thinks. I care what my parents think. And that's all that really matters. I did my best with that story. I had nothing. I tried to spin some cotton candy out of it. I put it away. It won't be in my anthology. I was a good soldier and I did my job. And that's the other thing about this job, like editors, sometimes you just gotta do the work. And sometimes it isn't a story that like you love and that's a passion for you, and sometimes you just do the work because you're getting paid and that's your job. And your editor needs you to cut him some slack and just do a 500-word piece on jujubes. Don't be a dick about it. Like that's sometimes the job, and that's, for me, I still feel like my editor is my client. I still feel like I'm very lucky to have my position, and I'm there to please my editor. So if my editor asks me for 500 words on Tuesday, soldier story is accepted, he will get 499 words on Monday. And that's how I treat the job. It's a job. It's not, I love the job, I'm passionate about it, I care about craft, all those things. I want to get paid. It's a job. Penelope Cruz, Jesus, fucking nightmare. You know, I went to a talk with, Mordecai Richler? He's this Canadian author. He's dead now. He's a very intimidating presence. And he came to talk at my school. And he said, I will answer any question you want, but I'm not going to tolerate stupid questions. And then Brooke, I was pointing at John. Behind him. And then someone said, any questions? Of course, no one says anything, and Mordecai's like, thanks very much, and he leaves. I have lots more this is going to be like a hostage situation. If you want more bed-shitting stories, I will give you them. 99.999994% of the time, I poop in toilets or designated poop receptacles. Those .0006, oh, someone has a question, good. Page in the background going, enough with the poop.
Hi, Chris.
Hi.
So before Peter, you probably had a lot of other editors. Can you talk about any disservice that an editor ever did to your career? A bad editor?
No. No, I've been very lucky. I've had really good editors. I will say I have worked at places where they do, so there's kind of two schools of editing. There's the editor-writer, very intimate relationship where you work for and you together make this thing, and it'll get copy edited and fact checked and all that stuff, but it's just you two do it. And then I'm trying to come up with a polite word, a dog pile. There's like the dog pile form of editing where somehow it goes into a room and 6 guys all like, and editors are people too, most of them, and they want to contribute and they want to impress their boss, and so they all kind of, and then a story will come out the other end and you'll be like, what the hell is that? Like, it just doesn't look like anything that and I think that's a terrible way to edit. Not out of any like prima donna, I just think you end up with a worse story. You end up with a story by committee. And I think if you go watch a movie and there's 6 screenwriters in the credits, that movie's gonna be crap. And if you go to see a movie with 1 screenwriter, 1 director, it's gonna be pretty good. It's gonna have a voice. So I will say I've had experiences where, working for other places, where I've been dogpiled. And that is not a good feeling. But no, I've been uniformly blessed with a succession of, John taking a chance, Ken hiring me for no reason, Graham taking me under his wing even though he hated me, Andy hiring me for no good reason, donuts, sliding across to Peter and still being with Peter. I've had a very lucky, and again, I wish I could give you practical advice about finding that person. They might be in this room, in which case go off together to and be together.
Thank you.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your reporting. Obviously some of the stories you do are deeply reported, and just kind of the style. Are you a planner? Do you kind of go in, or do you just kind of jump in and try to find the story where you are?
For me, reporting is and I hope, I'm gonna get preachy. A lot of writers, when they think about magazine writing, they think about style and 7,000 words, grace. I can really spin some. It's the reporting. Like any great story has this backbone of reporting. And for me, it wasn't out of any kind of noble thought about reporting. For me, writing is difficult for me. I'm not someone who just kind of, so the more I report, the easier the writing is. So it's selfish in some ways, the reporting I do. And I recognize my limitations as a writer. Like, I know very clearly that I am Esquire's worst writer. In terms of writing sentences, I'm Esquire's worst writer. But I would put my reporting up against anybody. And I was joking about Sean, but if we were on a story together, I mean, there'll be stones that I unturn that he doesn't even know about. Because after I unturn them, I bury them in a field somewhere. Like I will put my reporting up against anybody. And for me, that's what makes these stories. Jeff won his NMA for reporting. They talked about the vignettes and the writing and the style, and that all counts, that matters. But if Jeff didn't have those people and those voices, and that story's bullshit. And what you sometimes find is people think they're good enough writers that they can skate on the reporting. I can cover this up with some style. And you can see it from a million miles away. I'll be like, oh wow, what a load of shit. Like, you didn't do the work. And the stupid thing about that is reporting I don't think of reporting as a skill the way I think of writing as a talent that you do or do not have. Reporting is just labor. Like, reporting is just time and making phone calls and going places you're technically not supposed to go and being brave. And they're all things that you have in you easily. I say this at every conference, and the people who've gone to conferences with me are probably so sick of me saying this. I believe this truly. The thing you can do today that will make you better, the instant you leave this room, is be the best listener in any of your group of friends. If I was hiring one of you to work at Esquire, which I'm not, but if I was, I would hire the listener. I would hire the person who listens and who cares. I would hire the biggest heart. I don't give a shit if you can write a great sentence. That'll come. But listening, you can leave here tomorrow or today and just shut up. Be the one of your friends that all your friends go to tell you things. That's reporting. And so I think when you go out into the field and do this work, one of the noble parts of journalism takes a ton of shit for good reason. But one of the noble parts of this profession is like Ben talking about his story. That you're the person who sits there as these other people release. And that's a service. That is not hokum bullshit. That is, you're doing a good thing for those people. And you're serving your story. And it's so simple. You just shut up and you listen. And you're instantly in the top 5%. Instantly. So reporting for me is it. If I read you're doing stuff now, I was saying this to Sean yesterday, do the thing that you want to do. If you want to be a feature writer, don't be doing radio, whatever. Be writing features, doesn't matter where you're doing it, write features. An editor, Eric, will see your story and he'll see in it the work. He'll be like, that guy works. And it doesn't matter if it's not perfect, you're young, blah, blah, blah. I can see that this person cares and there's labor and it's good. It's solid, fundamental work. That's what you need. You need to leave this school with a few pieces of that. No one's ever asked me where I got my education. No one's ever, you need that thing. And you give it to them and they go, that person. So leave here with at least one of those things that you can go.
Well, thank you. This has been a great time.